good explanation of why they didn't do it. And one interpretation of why they didn't do it is because they don't believe it. And they're not likely to believe it once Scotland has, as they hope, rejected independence. And so I think that has to be a very serious objection to it. That actually, it's not really a question about whether Douglas Hume made a commitment in the past and the kind of jam tomorrow. It's not about his particular experience. It's about the fact that actually, on the evidence of their own actions, on the evidence of listening to the House of Commons, listening to the Labour delegation from Scotland, who seems to regard devolution and devolved institutions as taken over by illegitimate forces if they're not having a Labour majority or substantial minority in them, then they don't sound like voices to me which are terrifically keen on more devolution. So I'd like to see more evidence that actually from the Labour Party and mostly from the Conservative Party members from England that they have any interest in reforming the British state along the lines that Ruth Davidson's speech suggests, that sometimes Labour Party people suggest. And I think there's a real reason to be hugely sceptical that until we get decent, substantial proposals and commitments from Ed Miliband and so on, from David Cameron, not to believe a single word of it.
Well, you're actually making me think of something I'd like to kind of address in a future episode here. I think I've got it lined up for one of the Scottish Independence podcasts in the future. But it's about bureaucracies, because why are Labour Party behaving in this way? Well, if you think about it, one of the reasons of the problems for old colonial countries is that the colonial bureaucracy was set up in order to funnel money and power back to the centralised authority, if we take the British Empire as a case in point, or the French, it's the same, to funnel money and power back up to London or to Paris. And it was all designed that way. Then, when the colony becomes free, the bureaucracy remains, which is why it's kind of easy meat for a dictator to come in, because it all just funnels up to the dictator. And then occasionally the dictator's gone, but all the machinery of government, you have a new dictator. And this has been one of the major problems for colonial things. It actually reminds me of the Labour Party, because the system in Labour is, okay, you do well in Scotland, you move up to London Labour. But now there's this other thing in Holyrood, and their system hasn't quite adjusted to that. So the lines of communication of where you go, okay, so you're doing well in the small scene in Scotland, well, that's you up into Westminster. And like there's always this thing about the Scottish mafia in Westminster, who've come up mostly through the Labour Party and gone up. Those lines of communication have become blurred now because of Holyrood. And maybe their sort of bureaucracy and organisation doesn't quite know how to react to it. And that's a long-winded answer, but I don't know, there might be something in it.
No, it does seem, and they are going through, the Labour Party, some interesting problems. I mean, there's been rumblings in particularly the Sunday Herald coverage of their prospective selection of candidates for Holyrood come 2016 elections. And the big problem that they were envisaging was that people were elected in 2011 that probably were not expected to be elected, if I can put it as softly as that. And loads of them are decent, smart folk in the Labour Party. I mean, people like Kezia Dugdale, Jenny Mara, Andrew Smith, Glasgow. They're actually the kind of folk that the Labour Party wouldn't have seen elected, but should be elected, should be in the Parliament. But there are other people, I won't name names, but there's a couple that come particularly to mind from the Glasgow delegation, who basically have said nothing, who are about as animated as a turnip as they sit quietly in the Holyrood chamber and do sod all. And the question is their position somehow privileged in the party selection process, or are they ruthless and do they chuck them out? And it seems, I mean, I am not privy to the internal wars and battles, which I'm sure are bloody and terrifying in the Labour Party, about who gets selected to seats, but it doesn't seem as if they've fully renewed themselves and committed themselves to a more electorally plausible position going into 2016 yet.
And that shows in the polls, like even though independence seems to be, well, it depends which poll you read. It's been going up and going down, but as far as the Holyrood election, I think the SNP are still well placed compared to Labour. They're not really making as much impact as you'd think after a sitting government of how long's that been now? 5-6 years?
Yes, well, since 2007, so it's stretching out in front of them, and by the time 2016, it'll have been ages, almost not quite a generation, but getting towards there. I mean, as we said a few weeks back before Christmas when we were talking to Ian Smart, I mean, my view is that Joanne Lamont can brutalise Salmond as wittily and abusively as much as she likes in Holyrood. But the fact is that the Labour Party in Scotland for Holyrood hasn't apparently got any strategy in terms of taking the vote out to parts of the country that they used to win, taking the vote out to Aberdeen, taking it to Dundee. I mean, they do all right in the councils in some of these seats, but I don't see any strategy, even the first stage of a strategy developing to take Labour back to these places where they actually have a good chance of winning historically.
Sorry, I'm amazed that you actually think Lamont wittily attacks Alexander. I always got the feeling that if there was an earthquake, actually, or aliens came and answered her question during First Minister's question, she would still stick to the script. Like, she's got what she's going to say, and that's not going to change no matter what happens in the meantime. It's quite bizarre watching her, actually.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think she's not, as I said before, for me, Joanne Lamont is the candidate for the base. She's the candidate that speaks to particular communities in the west coast of Scotland, and that's about it. I think she's got some good lines. I think her character, her persona of a kind of sceptical, bludgeoning woman, I don't mind. I quite enjoy that, actually. I don't think she's necessarily convincing all of the time, but I think it's quite good to see Salmond getting sort of thrashed about by somebody who really doesn't take anything that he says on. I'm not saying it's going to be electorally successful, and I'm not saying that it always works from her point of view. There's some small corner of me that has a small soft spot for Joanne Lamont, and that's my scandalous admission on this podcast.
How dare you? No. Just to come back to Holyrood, the last thing on this, and then we'll go on to our last topic. But one of the things that the EU think, with this vote, is this going to be, because very often Lamont and Davidson put together a kind of united front, and Davidson often echoes a similar kind of question that Lamont does, and they haven't done that the last couple of weeks. But, with the Labour Party supporting the EU and the Tories having this, shall we say, internal discussion, that's going to cause a big schism between the two of them in Holyrood, is it not?
I mean, it might. I think the point you made about Labour being pro-EU is, I think, a bit previous. I think it is obvious that the Labour Party is pro-EU or anti a referendum on the European Union. I mean, I don't actually have a clear sense at all, and I don't think it's through want of personal diligence about what Ed Miliband thinks about this or what Joanne Lamont thinks about it. And certainly there have historically been strains of the Labour Party that were extremely Eurosceptic, albeit with a kind of different tone perhaps than you might get from your Eurosceptic Tories. I think from their point of view, it puts them in a different position with respect to the attack on independence from the EU perspective. I think that's absolutely true. I mean, Joanne was the one that was plugging away at the same theme this week in FMQs. And as I remember, Ruth Davidson asked about something slightly different. And obviously they are in a different position. But this actually touches on something which I wrote about this morning in a blog about Ruth Davidson's relationship with the general Conservative Party. At the beginning of her First Minister's questions response, she made a small sally about the Labour Party and in defence of David Cameron's policy about the EU and giving Scots a choice on it, is how I think that she put it. And obviously that sort of breaks the alignment you were referring to, that brings this kind of Tory Labour Party conversation and split into Holyrood and into the Holyrood debate. And actually I think that's something which we are much more likely to see much more of as the referendum approaches in parallel with the general election for Westminster, which is approaching, that it's not going to be comfortable for the Labour Party and the Conservative Party to be seen to be agreeing with each other publicly. And actually all of the pressures will be on from Westminster, just as a matter of form, not as a matter of anything illegitimate, I think, to heighten the tensions between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, to make the kind of clear blue water, to use the hideous cliche. And that's going to have a real poisonous impact on this Better Together campaign, because they're going to be at each other's throats much of the time and calling each other sinners and suggest they're destroying, public services which people value on one hand, and on the other hand they'll be saying, but we're all better together.
Right. Can I just say, as much as I abuse First Minister's questions for the ridiculous show that it is sometimes, I just think Prime Minister's questions is equally as bad. I think it was Alex Massey, when we had him on, said, is this the best we can do? Well, if you listen to Prime Minister's questions as well, all the kind of guffawing and this kind of stuff, I don't think it's any better of a spectacle. Both of them are kind of political theatre. And the thing is that makes First Minister's questions a bit disappointing is that it tries to they're all trying to outdo Westminster for the political theatre that isn't very good anyway in Prime Minister's questions. Why not just actually do it in some kind of useful way?
If you watched First Minister's questions this week, if you summarise it, it was essentially Joanne Lamont, Tory. Alex Salmond, no, tell you who's a Tory. You're a Tory. To which Joanne Lamont wittily responds, Tory, and so on. And actually,
and Ruth Davidson, actual Tory.
I'm a Tory. And actually, you think back to the general election in 2010, when it was essentially a polarised battle in political terms and in terms of the results between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, and the Labour Party romped home over 1 million voters. The Conservative Party actually only got a few tens of thousands less than the SNP got in 2010 in terms of overall levels of votes. Scotland includes a very large number of people who even in that polarised environment, we're talking about maybe 500,000 people, who voted Conservative. I know it was something we were discussing when Alex Massey and Robin McAlpine were on just before Christmas in our review of 2012. But I do wonder how this sort of anti-Tory, pro-independence rhetoric plays with people who are potential Tory voters. I mean, take like Ayr, to give you a one wee obsessive psephological detail from 2011 from the Holyrood election. In the constituency of Ayr, which was won by a Conservative Party guy, he won by, I think, around 3,000 votes. In Ayr, in the regional vote, the SNP won by about 6,000 votes. So they came out on top of that regional vote, which went forward to elect list MSPs. Now, they did so by a ticket, very much like Alex Massey has said that he voted Conservative on the constituency, SNP in the region. And actually, I'm not entirely sure how strategically sensible it is to slag off 500,000 people.
On the topic of political theatre, did you see Obama this week?
I did. I saw some of it. I couldn't bring myself to watch all of his inauguration.
I thought it was very bizarre. If you were just to sort of listen to the speech, apparently in the next 4 years, the United States is going to become some kind of socialist paradise. But with Gitmo still open and drones going off all over the world and a certain economic system that they have in America. Oh, and they said they wanted to reform the institutions, the international institutions, to help. I think maybe it means the IMF. So maybe they're going to reform them so that America doesn't have complete control over all of them. But somehow I have serious doubts about that. I thought the speech was amazing. If you were just to listen to it, you'd think we're going to be in this wonderful social democratic heaven in a few years' time. I'll be extremely surprised if much of it comes to pass. But what always amazes me with Obama is, against all the evidence, everyone goes nuts when he says something. Oh, it's coming. The new beautiful society is coming. Look, he's doing it. And what happens? Not much. To use a very sore example, so there's new gun reform laws, so they want something against automatic weapons, which I suppose something is better than nothing, but is that really going to solve this problem in America? I doubt it. And another example, there's Obamacare. I mean, has that really ensured that everyone in America is getting treatment at a reasonable price and not being done by their insurance companies? I don't think so. So, I don't know. What did you make of it? Do you think the left-wing heaven's coming in America in the next 4 years?
Well, I think the error that you may have made there is the assumption that Obama is left-wing. I mean, he's not on most registers, I would say. And I know we've discussed that before. I mean, what I found most interesting about the speech, and this is to be very shallow compared to the substantial comments you made, is how dreadfully badly they were written. I mean, if you listen to speeches given by British politicians, they're not necessarily the burnished stuff of Cicero and Demosthenes, but the sort of highfalutin nonsense. I was sitting there reading some of these phrases that he'd uttered, and it's all this kind of golden city on a hill, the promise, the unfulfilled, yada yada yada, and it's just all such abstract nonsense, and it sounds like a religious peroration to me. And I think there's always something interesting when your politicians start speaking like priests. And there's definitely something about the American executive branch, their elected king, which